In December of 2020, a land brokerage in Lubbock, Texas, published a listing. The property was not unusual in kind. Texas sells ranch land constantly. Roughly 9 out of every 10 listings this particular firm handled were, in the broker's own assessment, worn-out ground-changing hands quietly. This one was different in a single respect. The asking price was $341.7 million. Read the brochure closely, though, and the arithmetic starts to behave strangely. The livestock were not included. The equipment was not included. And of the mineral rights beneath 266,255 acres, rights that had produced oil continuously for 100 years, only 1/4 would pass to the buyer. 14 months later, the ranch sold. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported the price at $192.2 million. Other outlets reported it at more than $320 million. Some said $350 million. The broker who handled the transaction was asked directly what was paid, and he laughed and said he couldn't tell you. There is one more detail, and it is the one that should bother you. $192,202 was not a negotiated figure. It was the published asking price of the Guthrie division, one of the 3 properties in the offering. Someone, somewhere, appears to have reported an asking price as a sale price, and the number stuck. So the most famous ranch in America changed hands for the first time in a century and a half, and the price is a rumor. That is a peculiar thing for a piece of real estate. Real estate is the most legible asset there is. You can walk it, fence it, survey it, tax it. And yet nobody can agree what this one is worth, or in some deeper sense, what exactly was sold. The explanation is not in 2020. It is in a document written in 1922 by a man who was trying, very deliberately, to make certain this day could never come. Samuel Burke Burnett was 19 years old when he bought his first herd, 100 head of cattle purchased from a man named Frank Crowley in Denton, Texas. The precise year is disputed. Accounts place it between 1868 and 1871, and Burnett himself was not always consistent about it. The cattle already carried a brand, 4 6s, 66666. Here is the part that gets skipped. Burnett did not simply acquire cattle that happened to be marked. He bought the rights to the brand along with the animals, and he did it on purpose. In a country where cattle theft was a working business model, a brand's value was defined by how hard it was to alter with a hot iron. The open-topped 6 was, by that standard, very good design. You could not easily turn it into something else. So the first asset in this story is not land. It is a mark, a form of security. That distinction is going to matter enormously, but not for another 150 years. The second asset arrived in 1873. A financial panic collapsed cattle prices, while Burnett had 1,100 steers standing in Wichita, Kansas. Rather than sell into the crash, he wintered them on the plains and sold the following year for a profit of roughly $10,000. What he had learned was that the cattle business is not a business of animals. It is a business of grass and time. If you can hold, you win. If you can't, you're a seller in a bad market. He became one of the first Texas ranchers to systematically buy steers, graze them, and sell them fattened. A strategy that requires 2 things above all others: access to credit and access to grass. The credit he solved in 1869 when he married Ruth Lloyd, daughter of the Fort Worth banker Martin B. Lloyd. The grass was harder because in 1881 North Texas stopped raining. Drought did to the open range what no market could. Grass simply ceased to exist across enormous stretches of North Texas, and cattlemen with credit, cattle, and no feed began looking north, across the Red River into Indian Territory, where the Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache held some of the finest grassland on the southern plains. The man who controlled access to it was Quanah Parker. The son of a Comanche chief and a white captive, Quanah had led the last free bands of the Comanche and, after surrender, became something no one quite had a word for: a negotiator, a landlord, a political operator inside a system designed to dismantle his people. Burnett negotiated with him directly, repeatedly, and successfully. The result was a lease on roughly 300,000 acres of the big pasture at 6.5 cents an acre. Burnett moved more than 10,000 head onto it. The tribes collected something in the neighborhood of $20,000 a year. The friendship that followed was genuine enough that Quanah later named Burnett as his favorite among the white men he dealt with. A big-hearted cattleman, he said, who helped his people. Burnett learned Comanche customs. He brought Quanah into his own social world. And here is what the friendship actually produced. In cold structural terms, Burke Burnett now ran one of the largest cattle operations in the Southwest on land he did not own. His entire empire was a lease. That vulnerability became visible in 1898 when the federal government began winding down the arrangements to open the territory to homesteaders. The cattlemen were told to get their herds off. Burnett went to Washington and asked the President of the United States for time. Theodore Roosevelt granted a 2-year extension. The story that survives from this is the wolf hunt. In the spring of 1905, Burnett and his son Tom hosted Roosevelt for 10 days on the big pasture. Tom hauled in a chuck wagon and cowboys and built a camp near what is now Frederick, Oklahoma. Quanah Parker came and taught the president how to track horse thieves. The party took 17 wolves and coyotes. Roosevelt wrote home to his son about how much he'd loved it, and singled out Tom Burnett for particular praise. Before he left Texas, Roosevelt encouraged a cotton town called Nestorville to rename itself after his host. It became Burke Burnett. It is a wonderful story, and it obscures the real event. The real event is the number 2. 2 years is not a reprieve. 2 years is a countdown. Burnett had been told, in the most polite way available, that leased grass was finished as a business model, and that he had 24 months to solve the problem permanently. He had already started. In 1900, Burnett paid roughly $550,000, mostly in cash, for the 8-ranch, 141,000 acres in King County, 90-odd miles east of what is now Lubbock. The sale was large enough that the New York Times covered it. 3 years later, he bought the Dixon Creek Ranch in Carson and Hutchinson counties in the Panhandle, around 190,000 acres, purchased from, of all things, the Cunard steamship line. Together with his older holdings, the empire now ran to about 1/3 acres. Headquarters moved to a town called Guthrie. The obvious question is, why there? King County had no railroad, no navigable water, no city, and almost no people. It still has almost no people. The land was cheap for the reason all cheap land is cheap. It was dry, and dry country supports fewer cattle per acre than anywhere a rational buyer would prefer. Burnett bought marginal ground because marginal ground was the only kind available at the scale he needed. The strategy was not selection, it was accumulation. In 1917, he hired the Fort Worth architectural firm Sanguinet and Starts to build what he described as the finest ranch house in West Texas. It cost $100,000, a 3-story stone house with 13 bedrooms, 13 baths, 2 kitchens, and 3 fireplaces, dropped into a county that could not have filled it with guests if everyone in it came at once. It stands today. It is still called the Big House, and it raises a problem the documentary needs to solve, because the mansion does not fit the arithmetic. Thin grass in a dry county does not build stone houses. Something else was paying for this. Oil had been surfacing around Wichita County since 1912, but the event that changed North Texas came in July of 1918, when a wildcat well on S.L. Fowler's farm hit near Burke Burnett. Within 3 weeks, there were 60 rigs working. By the end of the year, the field was producing 7,500 barrels a day, and 20,000 people had poured in. 20 trains a day ran between Burke Burnett and Wichita Falls. 19 refineries went up. This deserves a pause because of where it happened. Part of that boom sat squarely on land the Burnetts had already sold, an old horse ranch tract northwest of town, disposed of to Wichita Falls, investors who subdivided it to farmers. The single richest oil strike in the region occurred on ground Burke Burnett had let go. He did not make that mistake again. Starting in 1917, he leased the mineral rights beneath his panhandle ranches to serious operators, Gulf, Skelly, others. In 1918, the Gulf No. 1, drilled on the 6666's Carson County land, came in as what was then called the largest gas well in the world. There were no pipelines to move gas to market, so they capped it and kept drilling. In 1920, Burnett wrote to a friend in Fort Worth about the rigs working his Dixon Creek land. He noted almost cheerfully that a strike would put the ranch out of business as far as cattle were concerned. Then he asked, "Isn't there more money in oil than cattle?" In 1921, the Gulf Burnett No. 2 came in a few miles west of the first well. It was the first successful oil well in the Texas Panhandle, and it opened one of the largest fields in the state's history. Burke Burnett died on June 27, 1922, months after the discovery. Now hold two facts together. The first, the 66666 was assembled out of the cheapest, driest, least desirable rangeland available in Texas. The second, it turned out to be sitting on top of an oil field. From 1921 forward, the 6666 was not a cattle ranch that occasionally found oil. It was a mineral estate that ran cattle. Beef paid the cowboys. Oil paid for everything else. That inversion is the entire reason this ranch exists today. And you can prove it by looking at the ranches that did not have it. The XIT, 3 million acres, the largest fenced ranch on earth, was broken up and sold off in pieces. The matador went to a syndicate. Empire after empire in this country died of the same disease. A low-margin business colliding with a bad decade. The 6666 never had to face a bad decade on cattle income alone. But surviving the market was only half the problem. The other half was surviving the family. Burnett had watched what happened to fortunes when their owners died. So had his neighbors. Consider the Wagoners, whose enormous ranch lay just to the east. W.T. Wagoner divided his holdings among 3 children, then reversed himself and pulled everything back into a trust in which the heirs sat as board members with no real authority. The result was litigation among Wagoner descendants that ran for 25 years, and a ranch that finally sold intact but exhausted in 2016. Burnett's solution was more extreme, and it is the hinge of this entire story. His will left the ranch property in trust. His son Tom, by then his only surviving child, received an annuity, not the land. The final beneficiary of the trust was designated as the last surviving grandchild of Tom Burnett, a person who had not yet been born. Think about what that instrument does. It removes the possibility of division because there is nothing to divide among. It removes the possibility of an heir selling because no heir owns it outright until the machine terminates. It removes the possibility of family litigation because there is no competing claim to litigate. Burke Burnett did not build a family business, he built a funnel. Every generation would narrow to a single point, and the point would carry the whole thing forward. For 100 years, it worked better than anything comparable in Texas. And it should be said now plainly, so that it can sit in the back of your mind for the rest of this. An instrument that requires exactly one heir in every generation is only as durable as the willingness of that one heir. Tom Burnett had one child, a daughter, Anne Valiant Burnett, born in 1900. She grew up between two worlds of horsemen, ranch cowboys on one side, Comanche children on the other, and became, by every account, a genuine hand. Not an heiress who rode, a rider who inherited. What she did with the ranch changed what the ranch was. In the 1930s and 1940s, she formalized a horse breeding program. She helped found the American Quarter Horse Association, and when AQHA inspectors began registering animals, she got hers in front of them immediately. In 1944, a dun stallion foaled on the ranch 4 years earlier was registered under the name Hollywood Gold. He would sire 263 registered horses across 22 crops. Alongside Joe Hancock, Gray Badger II, and Sea-Bars, he became the genetic foundation of the ranch's remuda, and his blood still runs through cutting horse pedigrees 80 years later. Understand what this actually accomplished. Beef is a commodity. A steer is worth what steers are worth that week, and no rancher can change that. A bloodline is not a commodity. A bloodline is proprietary, it compounds, and it appreciates. Miss Anne moved the ranch's productive output from a thing anyone could sell to a thing only the 666 could sell. In 1969, a second oil field was struck on the Guthrie property. The mineral engine got a second wind, and in 1978, 2 years before her death, Anne Burnett Tandy established the Burnett Foundation. That detail is easy to skip past. It should not be. A foundation is a mechanism for moving money permanently out of a family's control and into public purposes. From 1978 forward, the wealth generated under this land began flowing outward, to museums, to medicine, to education, rather than back into the estate. The oil was being routed away from the ranch by the family's own design. She died in 1980. The trust, written in 1922, now terminated exactly as intended on a single person, Anne Burnett Winfore. Marion had been born in Fort Worth in 1938, 16 years after the document that made her the beneficiary of everything. She was Burke Burnett's only great-grandchild. She had studied art history in Austin and Geneva, spent childhood summers at Guthrie, and inherited at 41 an empire measured in billions. The ranches, the mineral position, and what became the Burnett Oil Company. Her tenure is the reign in this story's title, and it is worth being specific about what she did with it. She modernized the labor. The Burnett ranches were among the first in the industry to give cowboys health insurance and retirement plans, in a business that had for a century been run on the assumption that cowboys were interchangeable. She escalated the horse program past anything the industry had seen. Under Marion, the ranch acquired Dash for Cash, who won 21 of 25 career starts and $507,687 on the track before becoming one of the most consequential sires in quarter horse history. Then Streak and Six, then Special Effort, a racing Triple Crown champion. By the mid-1990s, the 66666 stood the three most valuable stallions in the breed simultaneously. Commanding the highest stud fees in the business, their offspring would earn roughly $80 million and win close to 200 stakes races. And she did something else, which nobody at the time seems to have identified as a turning point. She began selling the image. 4/6's Cowboys and 4/6's Country appeared in Marlboro advertising, the most successful visual branding campaign in the history of American consumer products. The ranch itself, the look of it, the men on it, became content. That detail matters more than it appeared to at the time. Meanwhile, the philanthropy accelerated. The Burnett Foundation would distribute more than $1 billion in grants. Marion founded the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe. She endowed the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth. And at some point, the family gifted half the mineral interest beneath the Dixon Creek Ranch to Texas Christian University, a half interest that, by the late 2010s, was generating royalties averaging over $2 million a year. The oil was leaving, deliberately, generously, permanently. She was still buying land at 78, the Frisco Creek Division in Sherman County, acquired in 2016, and she had one child, a daughter, Anne Windy Grimes. Some years before her death, Marion told the broker Sam Middleton that when she passed, the ranches would all be sold and that he would be getting a call. Middleton asked the obvious question, "What about Windy?" Marion's answer was a question of her own. Why would she want to burden her daughter with that obligation? That sentence is the fall. Not a market crash, not a drought, not a family feud. A mother looking at the thing her great-grandfather had spent his life making indivisible and calling it a burden. Anne Marion died of lung cancer on February 11, 2020, at 81. Her will instructed that the ranching operations be sold. In December, the listing went up, and the fine print is where the story finishes assembling itself. 3 divisions: Guthrie, 142, 372 acres, listed at 192, 200 and 200. Dixon Creek, 114 and 455 acres, 137.3 million. Frisco Creek, 9,428 acres, 12.2 million. Total 341.7 million. The seller preferred to move it as one block. Included 119 pastures, 18 solar wells, 29 windmills, some 7,000 mother cows, 20 employee houses, 2 bunkhouses, the famous loft barn, an airstrip, and a 13,280 square foot house with 13 bedrooms. Not included, the livestock and equipment sold separately. And this, the estate owned all the minerals it had not already given away and would convey 1/4. At Dixon Creek, where oil has produced continuously since the 1920s, the family's remaining half interest was earning slightly over $2 million a year. The buyer would get half of that half. At Guthrie, royalties had been running $400,000 to $500,000 a year. The buyer would get 1/4. Read that again, and the whole 100-year structure snaps into focus. The Burnett estate was selling the ranch and keeping the oil, which means that whoever bought it would be acquiring, for the first time since 1921, a cattle and horse operation that had to pay for itself. The property went under contract in May 2021 and closed on January 21, 2022. The buyer was a group led by Taylor Sheridan, a Fort Worth kid who had grown up near the ranch, become an actor, then become the writer of Yellowstone, the most watched drama on American television. Sheridan could not fund it alone. He reportedly renegotiated a $200 million production deal to work more, brought in outside investors for the balance, and described the experience with some accuracy. He was rich for about 45 minutes, and then he was broke again. Sheridan had written the 66666 into Yellowstone before he owned it. In season 4, a character named Jimmy is sent from Montana to Texas to learn how to be a cowboy, and the episode functions as something close to a pilot for a separate series. That series had a name. It was called 666. Paramount announced it in February 2021, months before the ranch went under contract. The purchase and the show were the same idea, and the business model that followed is the part worth sitting with. Sheridan's production arrangement has the studio paying to film on ranches he owns, a reported $50,000 a week, and paying to rent his cattle at a reported $25 a head, and paying for his horses and his wranglers, and paying for a cowboy camp to train the actors. The ranch's most reliable revenue is no longer beef, and it is no longer oil, because the oil largely stayed with the estate. It is the ranch's own image. There is 666 beef sold direct. There is a 4-6's Ranch Steakhouse that opened at the Wynn in Las Vegas, where the top cut ran $990. There is a merchandising and retail partnership with TCU that travels the National Rodeo Circuit. There is a new stallion station at a Granbury division, standing more than 40 stallions and shipping semen worldwide. And here is the irony: the history has been building toward the whole time. 6666, the television series, the project that made the purchase make sense, has never been made. 5 years after it was announced, there's no cast, no production date, no release window. Its presumed lead has publicly said he doesn't expect to return anytime soon. Sheridan has signed with NBC Universal and will be gone from Paramount by the end of the decade. Other spin-offs have come and gone. This one remains indefinitely on hold. The show about the ranch didn't get made. The ranch became the show anyway. Return to the number nobody can confirm: 192.2 million, or 320 million, or 341.7 million, or 350 million. The broker won't say, the buyers won't say, the estate won't say. The reason the price is unknowable is not secrecy. It is that the thing sold was never a single thing. Burke Burnett bought a brand before he bought an acre, because a brand couldn't be altered. He bought the driest country in Texas because it was the only country he could afford at scale, and found an oil field under it. He built an instrument that concentrated everything into one heir per generation, which made the ranch immune to the division that destroyed every empire around it. For 4 generations, the instrument held: Tom, Miss Anne, Little Anne. And it held because each of those people wanted it. The design had no other input. It could survive drought, panic, the collapse of the open range, the end of the leases, the death of the founder, and a century of beef markets. But it required, absolutely and without alternative, that one person in each generation say yes. In 2020, the last one said no, and there was no clause for that. What was left was disassembled along the seam that had always been there. The Burnett Foundation kept the minerals, the part that had quietly paid for everything since 1921, and sold the surface, the buildings, the horses, the cattle, the name, and the 4-6's. The buyer got the ranch, the family kept the reason the ranch worked, so the new owner runs it the only way it can now be run. Not as a mineral estate with cattle on top, but as an image with cattle underneath. Cowboys still ride out at Guthrie. 7,000 cows still carry the brand. The stallions still cover mares, and the operation is sustained in significant part by cameras, by beef sold under a logo, by a steakhouse 2 states away, by a name that a 19-year-old bought in 1868, specifically because nobody could change it. He was right about that. It was the one asset that never depreciated, never dried out, and never depended on rain. It is also, in the end, the only part of the 666 that could be sold whole.